The last thing Lady Elara Voss ever tasted was honeyed wine and the smile of the man who handed it to her. The banquet hall glittered with 1,000 candles. Laughter rolled across silk and gold, and in the middle of all that warmth her throat began to close. She did not scream, she could not. Her fingers curled around the stem of the goblet as the poison unfurled through her blood like ink dropped in water, and the last thing she saw before the chandeliers blurred into smears of fire was her betrothed Crown Prince Cassian. Not rushing to her side but exchanging one quiet knowing glance with the woman standing behind his throne. That glance told her everything. She had been chosen to die tonight by people who had smiled at her only hours before. Then the world went black and did not end. She woke gasping, sunlight in her eyes, the smell of lavender soap on her own skin. Her hands were unshaking. Her throat was whole. On her nightstand sat an invitation, still sealed, to a banquet that, according to the calendar beside her bed, was 3 months away. She was alive, she had time, and now she knew exactly whose faces to watch. 3 months. Elara sat up so fast the room spun, and for a moment she thought she was still dying, that this soft golden light was simply what the human mind conjured in its final seconds. She pressed a hand to her chest. Her heart hammered under her palm, fast and alive and undeniably hers. Asterisk. My lady, her maid Bettina knocked twice before easing the door open, a tray of warm bread balanced against her hip. You cried out in your sleep, bad dream. Elara opened her mouth to answer and found she had no words for it. I died. I was murdered in front 300 guests and none of them so much as flinched. She swallowed the sentence whole. Just a dream, she said instead, and the lie tasted strange, because for the first time in her life, Elara Voss understood exactly how much a lie could cost a person who trusted the wrong smile. She had grown up an orphaned ward in Duke Ashgrove's household, plucked from a minor lordly family whose lands had been quietly swallowed by debt after her parents' deaths. She had learned early that gratitude was the price of shelter, and so she had spent 16 years being agreeable, gentle, and endlessly, foolishly trusting. When Crown Prince Cassian Dreven had chosen her, not the daughters of dukes, not the foreign princesses paraded before him, the entire court had called it a fairy tale. Elara now understood it had been a leash. She dressed slowly that morning, watching her own hands in the mirror as though they belonged to a stranger who had been given a second chance she did not deserve and could not yet explain. The banquet in her memory, the one that had killed her, was the autumn accord, the grand feast celebrating the treaty between Dreven and the northern kingdom of Vesmir. She remembered the wine. She remembered the goblet, gold-rimmed, a gift from Lady Seraphine Kell, the prince's favorite courtier. The woman everyone whispered was far closer to Cassian than a favorite courtier should be. She remembered the glance Cassian had given Seraphine as Elara's throat closed. He knew, she thought, and the thought made her hands go cold even in the warm morning light. He knew, and he did nothing. At breakfast, Duke Ashgrove, her guardian, a stern man who loved her in the clipped, dutiful way of someone who had buried his own daughter years ago, and refused to let himself love easily again, noticed her staring too long at nothing. You look as though you've seen a ghost, child. Perhaps I have, Elara murmured, and when he frowned, she softened it into a smile. I only mean I dreamed something vivid. It's nothing, uncle. But it was not nothing. It was 3 months, a poison she now knew the taste of before it ever touched her lips, and a list of names that had in another life watched her die and called it tragedy. She began that very day to write, not letters, not yet, lists, names. Small cruelties she had once excused as court politics. The way Seraphine's ladies had accidentally ruined her gown before her betrothal ball. The way Cassian had grown colder in private even as he grew warmer in public, praising her devotion to crowds while barely looking at her over dinner. The way Master Torvin, the court alchemist, had visited Seraphine's chambers late at night, always leaving through the servants' passage instead of the front hall. She had noticed all of it before. She had simply never let herself see it. By the time the candle guttered low, her list had a shape and the shape had a center. Seraphine Kell did not act alone, and whatever poison had killed Elara in her first life had not been mixed by an amateur. She needed proof. She needed allies. And she needed, above all, to become someone who could no longer be poisoned by a smile. That evening, a servant delivered an unexpected letter, sealed in plain wax with no house crest, an oddity in a court where every scrap of parchment announced its sender's rank before its message. Elara broke the seal with trembling fingers. I know what you saw in your dream, Lady Voss. I have seen it 2-3 times now. If you wish to survive the autumn accord, meet me at the old chapel at midnight. Come alone or do not come at all. Elara read it twice, then a third time, her pulse roaring in her ears. Someone else remembered dying. The old chapel sat at the edge of the palace grounds, abandoned since the last queen's death, its stained glass windows dark with decades of dust. Elara told Bettina she couldn't sleep and wished to walk the gardens, a small lie, easier now than it had been that morning, and slipped out through the servants' gate wrapped in a plain gray cloak. She should have been afraid. She realized, walking through the dark, that she simply wasn't. Death had already taken her once. It had lost its power to frighten her the way it frightened people who had never felt it close their throat. The chapel door was already open. Inside, a single lantern burned on the altar, and beside it stood a man she recognized instantly. Though his face was half-shadowed, Prince Roderick Dreven, Cashin's older half-brother, born to a mistress, and therefore forever barred from the throne he might otherwise have inherited. In her first life, Elara had barely spoken 3 sentences to him. He was quiet, unambitious by reputation, content to hunt and read and stay far from court intrigue. "You came alone," he said. "Good, that tells me you're not a fool, whatever else people say about you." "People say a great many things about a woman who's about to marry a crown prince," Elara replied evenly, though her heart hammered. "You said you'd seen it too, the banquet, the poison." Roderick's jaw tightened, 3 times 3 autumn accords. "Each one I wake a season earlier, remembering the one before. And each time you die within the hour, and within the year, I do too, quieter, they call it a hunting accident, but I know an arrow wound made to look accidental when I see one." He met her eyes. "This is the first time I've had the courage to speak to you before the banquet instead of after your funeral." The words should have terrified her. Instead, something inside Elara's chest loosened, some tight, lonely fear she hadn't let herself name until someone else confirmed she wasn't imagining her own murder. "Why do they kill you too?" she asked. "Because I ask questions Cashin doesn't want answered. Because Seraphine Kell isn't merely his favorite, Lady Voss. She's the daughter of a Vesmir nobleman my father exiled 20 years ago for treason. She didn't come to this court to love my brother. She came to destroy this house from the inside, one accord at a time, and she needed you gone to do it without a rival heir standing in her way." Elara's mind raced back through every soft word Seraphine had ever offered her, every gift, every smile edged so carefully in kindness that Elara had never thought to check it for a blade. "And Cashin knows." Roderick's silence answered before his words did. "Cashin loves her. Whether he knows what she truly is or refuses to know it, I can't say. I only know that in every life I've lived, he watches you die and does not stop it." The lantern flickered. Somewhere outside, a door creaked, too deliberate to be the wind. Roderick's hand shot to the dagger at his hip. "Someone followed one of us here." They doused the lantern together, plunging the chapel into a darkness so complete Elara could hear her own pulse. Footsteps crossed the gravel path outside, slow, unhurried, the gait of someone who wasn't hiding, only listening. "Lady Voss," a voice called, light and familiar and utterly chilling. "I thought I saw you slip away from the East Garden." Seraphine Kell. Elara's stomach dropped through the stone floor. Beside her, Roderick went utterly still, the kind of stillness that came from a man who had already died once for being caught in the wrong place. "I couldn't sleep," Elara called back, forcing warmth into her voice, the same practiced sweetness she'd used for 16 years to survive a court that had never truly wanted her in it. "I only wished for air. Is that a crime now, Lady Kell?" A pause. Then laughter, silvery and false. "Of course not. Only you should have a guard with you. The gardens aren't safe alone at night. Who knows what might happen to a future queen who wanders where she shouldn't." It was not a warning. Elara understood that now with a clarity that made her want to laugh bitterly at the version of herself who had once mistaken those words for care. It was a threat wearing the shape of concern, the exact tone Seraphine had used the night before the autumn accord in Elara's first life, urging her gently toward the goblet with the gold rim. "Try this one, my lady, it's from Vesmir, it's rather good." "I'll return to my rooms directly," Elara said. "Thank you for your concern." Footsteps retreated. Only when the gravel had gone silent for a full minute did Roderick exhale. "She knows something," he whispered, "or suspects it. That woman doesn't walk gardens at midnight for pleasure." "Then we have less time than we thought." Elara's mind was already moving, cataloging, the same instinct for survival that had kept a penniless orphan alive in a duke's cold household now turning itself toward war. "I need proof, Roderick. Proof that reaches the king's ear before proof reaches Seraphine's dagger. What do you know that you haven't told me?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation Elara saw a man who had spent 3 lifetimes being disbelieved. Master Torvin, the court alchemist. He owes gambling debts he could never repay on a royal stipend, yet 3 months ago he purchased a house in the merchant quarter outright, in gold. I've watched him meet Seraphine twice near the old dye works, where the smell would cover the scent of anything he might be mixing. Then he's our first thread to pull. And if we pull it wrong, it snaps and we're both dead before the accord ever begins. Elara looked at him, this quiet, disbelieved prince who had died for asking questions 3 times over, and felt something settle inside her that hadn't been there in her first life, not fear but purpose. Then we pull it carefully, she said. And this time I intend to be the one holding the knife when it counts. Roderick almost smiled. You've changed since the banquet I remember, Lady Voss. The banquet you remember killed me, Elara said quietly. I don't intend to give it the chance twice. Neither of them noticed the servant boy crouched behind the chapel's crumbling garden wall, close enough to have heard every word, already turning to run towards Seraphine Kell's chambers with a story worth more gold than he'd earn in a year. Master Torvin's workshop sat at the rear of the palace's east wing, thick with the smell of crushed herbs and hot metal, jars of tinctures lining every wall like a library of small, dangerous secrets. Elara had visited it a dozen times in her first life, always for harmless things, sleeping draughts, headache remedies, the small comforts of a pampered lady. She had never once looked past the shelves to wonder what else those cabinets might hold. She returned 3 days after the chapel meeting, alone this time, carrying a request for lavender oil as her excuse. Torvin was a small, stooped man with ink-stained fingers and eyes that would not quite meet hers. My lady, an unusual hour for a visit. I couldn't sleep, Elara said, the lie now smooth as silk on her tongue. Bettina swears by your chamomile blend. While he measured out oils with hands that trembled just slightly too much for a man mixing something so simple, Elara let her gaze wander carefully, casually, across the workshop. A ledger sat half-hidden beneath a stack of empty vials on the far table, its leather binding worn at the corners from frequent handling. You've redecorated, she said lightly, nodding toward a small crystal decanter that certainly hadn't sat on his shelf a year ago, its stopper carved with the Vesmir sigil. That's lovely work. Vesmir glass, isn't it? Torvin's hands stilled for exactly 1 heartbeat too long. A gift, my lady. From a grateful patient. How generous. Elara smiled, the same smile she'd once worn while dying with a goblet in her hand, except now it hid calculation instead of trust. You must have quite the reputation to receive gifts like that on a court alchemist's wage. She left with her lavender oil and no ledger, but she left with something better. The certainty, written plainly across the alchemist's 2 still hands, that he was hiding something he could not afford to have found. That night she sent Roderick a single line, unsigned, delivered by a servant she'd bribed with more gold than the girl had likely seen in her life. The ledger is real. We need eyes inside that workshop we can trust. His reply came before dawn. I know a locksmith who owes my mother's memory a debt he's never repaid. Give me 3 days. 3 days became 5, and in those 5 days Elara did what she had never once thought to do in her first life. She watched Cassian instead of simply loving him. She watched him laugh at Seraphine's jokes with an ease he never showed at Elara's own small attempts at humor. She watched him spend evenings in council chambers discussing the Vesmir Treaty with an intensity that seemed less like statecraft and more like a man protecting something, or someone, he could not admit to protecting. On the 5th night, Roderick's locksmith slipped into Torvin's workshop while the alchemist dined with the king's ministers, and by morning, a single page from that hidden ledger sat folded inside Elara's jewelry box, smuggled beneath a false velvet lining. She unfolded it with hands that shook despite every effort at composure. It was not a list of patients. It was a list of asterisk doses, quantities, dates, and beside each one, a single coded initial. Beside the date of the autumn accord, in ink darker and fresher than the rest, someone had written a dosage measured not in the gentle increments of medicine, but in the precise, merciless math of murder. And beside it, unmistakable even in code, the initial E. Elara barely slept that week. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the ledger page, that single letter *E* sitting beside a dose meant to stop a heart the size of a fist. She had proof now, fragile stolen proof that could just as easily hang her for theft as convict anyone of murder, but proof nonetheless. What she needed now was a way to use it without revealing that she had it. The opportunity came, unexpectedly, in the form of an invitation to tea with Seraphine Kell herself. A gesture of goodwill, Seraphine's note read, before we become sisters of the court in truth, I do so wish for us to understand one another before the accord. In her first life, Elara would have accepted with genuine delight, grateful for the attention of the prince's glamorous favorite, flattered to be included in her circle. Now she read the invitation 3 times, searching for the blade she knew was folded somewhere inside the silk. She went anyway. Refusing would have told Seraphine exactly how much had changed. Seraphine's parlor smelled of jasmine and something colder beneath it, a perfume too carefully chosen to be accidental. She poured the tea herself, a small, deliberate intimacy, and smiled with a warmth that Elara now recognized as a performance so practiced it had likely fooled kings. "You've seemed distracted lately, Lady Voss," Seraphine said, stirring honey into her own cup with unhurried grace. "Nerves, I imagine. The accord approaches, and a bride's first great banquet is such a delicate thing, so much can go wrong." "So much can," Elara agreed, matching her tone precisely. "I've heard that even a single careless goblet can ruin an entire evening." Something flickered behind Seraphine's eyes, so brief Elara nearly missed it, a predator recalculating the size of its prey. "How dramatic you've become. Has someone been filling your head with court gossip? Prince Roderick, perhaps? I hear you've taken late walks together." "She knows." The realization landed like ice water down Elara's spine, though her face didn't so much as flicker. "The prince and I share concerns about the treaty's terms, nothing more scandalous than diplomacy, I assure you." "How reassuring." Seraphine's smile widened, and for one unguarded instant it stopped being beautiful and became something closer to a blade-catching candlelight. "Do enjoy the tea, my lady. I selected the blend myself. Vesmir Mountain Leaf, quite rare, quite potent in the wrong hands." Elara lifted the cup to her lips and did not drink. "I find I prefer my tea a touch cooler," she said instead, setting it down with a soft, deliberate asterisk click against the saucer. "Patience has taught me that the things worth savoring shouldn't be rushed." The two women looked at each other across a tea service worth more than most farmers' entire estates, and for the first time Seraphine understood. Elara could see it settle behind those calculating eyes, that the woman across from her was no longer the trusting, breakable girl who had died so easily the first time. "How curious you've grown, Lady Voss," Seraphine murmured, and there was no warmth left in it at all now. "I do hope, for your sake, that curiosity doesn't kill you before the wedding does." Elara left the parlor with her heart hammering and her tea untouched, and she had not gone 20 paces down the corridor before a hand closed around her wrist and pulled her into an alcove behind a marble pillar. It was Cashin. "What were you doing in Seraphine's chambers?" Cashin's voice was low, urgent, his handsome face drawn tight with something that might have been fear if Elara hadn't already learned, in another life, not to trust his expressions at face value. "Having tea with your favorite courtier," Elara said, keeping her voice light even as her pulse hammered beneath his grip on her wrist. "Is that forbidden now, my prince? You don't understand what she is." He glanced down the corridor, then pulled her deeper into the shadow of the alcove, and for one strange, disorienting moment, Elara saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen since long before her death. Real fear, real desperation. The boy she'd once genuinely believed she loved before that belief had cost her a throat full of poison. "Elara, listen to me. Whatever you think you know, whatever Roderick has told you, stay away from her, please." "Then tell me what she is, Cashin, instead of asking me to trust you blindly." The words came out sharper than she intended, 16 years of practiced softness finally cracking under the weight of a death she remembered, and he didn't. "Tell me why the court alchemist keeps a ledger with my initial written beside a killing dose. Tell me why you watch her instead of me at every dinner, why you defend the Vesmir Treaty like it's your own child. Why? Because if the treaty collapses, there will be war." Cashin's voice dropped to something raw and cornered. "Vesmir's old nobility never accepted the peace, Elara. Seraphine's family lost everything in that war, their lands, their name, her own brother executed as a traitor's son. She came to this court seeking justice for what my father did to hers. And I—" He stopped himself, jaw working, and in his silence Elara heard the rest of the sentence anyway. "And I let her stay because I understood her grief, and because I was fool enough to think understanding it would be enough to contain it." "You knew," Elara said quietly, and it was not a question. "You knew what she was capable of, and you kept her close anyway. I thought I could control the damage. I thought if I gave her position purpose a place in this court that didn't require burning it down." He shook his head. And for one moment, he looked less like a crown prince and more like an exhausted, frightened young man who had made a catastrophic miscalculation years before Elara had ever entered the picture. "I never thought she'd turn that hatred toward you." "She isn't only hunting me," Elara said. "She's hunting the entire treaty, and everyone standing between her and watching this kingdom answer for what it did to her family. I am simply the most convenient obstacle, the foolish, trusting bride who'll drink whatever's poured for her and call it love." Cashin flinched as though she'd struck him because in her first life that was exactly what she had done. "I won't let it happen," he said. "Not this time. Tell me what you know. Let me help you stop her before the accord." Elara studied his face for a long moment, the face she had once trusted enough to marry, the face that had watched her die without moving to save her. Perhaps in this life, forewarned and frightened, he truly meant it. Or perhaps love had simply taught him a more convincing way to lie. "I'll consider it," she said finally, stepping back from his grip. But understand this, Cassian, I nearly died trusting the wrong people once. I don't intend to make that mistake with anyone, prince or otherwise, ever again. She left him standing alone in the alcove and did not look back to see the torment on his face, because for the first time in her life, Elara Voss had learned that surviving mattered more than being believed. Elara met Roderick that same night in the walled orchard behind the old chapel, where the apple trees grew thick enough to hide two people who could not afford to be seen together twice in one season. Cassian knows, she told him, and watched the prince's face darken. Knows or knew? Roderick asked. There's a difference between a man who's always known his favorite is dangerous and a man just now realizing it. Does it matter? Either way, he let her stay close enough to plan my murder in his own palace. Elara paced beneath the bare branches, her mind moving faster than her feet. We can't simply expose her, Roderick. If we accuse her outright with stolen evidence, Torvin will burn the ledger before the king's guard ever reaches his workshop, and will have destroyed our only proof for nothing. Then what do you propose? We give her exactly the opportunity she wants. Elara stopped walking, and in the moonlight her expression had hardened into something Roderick had never seen on her in 3 lifetimes of memory. She's planned to poison me at the autumn accord. So we let her believe that plan is proceeding exactly as she designed it, until the moment she reaches for the goblet herself. Roderick's eyebrows rose. You want to switch the poison. I want her to condemn herself in front of the entire court with her own hands and her own ledger, so thoroughly that not even Cassian's love for her can protect her from the consequences. Elara's voice was steady now, cold in a way that surprised even herself. I need Torvin's ledger entered into evidence without him knowing it's been taken. I need the king's spymaster to witness the exchange at the banquet itself. And I need a decoy goblet identical to the one she gave me in my first life, gold-rimmed, Vesmir glass, unmistakable. And if she suspects a trap, then we make certain she has no reason to. Elara allowed herself for the first time in weeks something close to a smile. Pride is Seraphine's greatest weakness, Roderick. She spent 3 lifetimes, by your count, believing she's the only one clever enough to remember what happens at that banquet. She has never once considered that someone else might be watching just as carefully as she is. Roderick studied her for a long moment, something like admiration breaking through his usual guarded stillness. You've become a different woman than the one who died in my second life, Lady Voss. Death has a way of teaching lessons kindness never could. Elara pulled her cloak tighter against the cold. Now, tell me everything you know about the king's spymaster and whether his loyalty can be bought, borrowed, or simply appealed to with the truth. Lord Amory answers to the crown, not to courtiers or princes. If we bring him proof, real proof, not stolen fragments, he'll act, but he'll want more than a single ledger page, Elara. He'll want to see the crime attempted, not merely planned. Then we'll give him exactly that. Elara looked toward the palace, its windows glowing gold in the distance, the same windows that had watched her die once already behind their glittering glass. 3 months, Roderick. Seraphine has spent 3 lifetimes preparing to kill me at that banquet. I intend to spend these 3 months preparing to make certain it's the very last mistake she ever makes. Behind them, unseen in the dark tangle of orchard branches, a figure in a servant's plain gray cloak slipped away toward the palace, having heard enough to be worth a very great deal of gold indeed, though whose gold, even the figure itself had not yet decided. The next 10 weeks passed in a careful, quiet war fought entirely behind smiles. Elara resumed her public role as the prince's devoted bride-to-be, attending fittings and council teas with the same soft laughter she'd always offered, while beneath that performance she built, piece by careful piece, the machinery of Seraphine's downfall. Lord Amory, the king's spymaster, proved harder to convince than Roderick had promised. A narrow, watchful man with eyes that missed nothing, he'd listened to Elara's account of the ledger with an expression of polite, unmoved skepticism. You're asking me to accuse the crown prince's favorite of treason and attempted murder, he said, on the strength of a single stolen page and the word of a prince the court already considers unstable. I'm asking you to watch, Elara corrected, not to accuse. Simply to be present quietly at the autumn accord near the wine service, and to trust your own eyes over my testimony. Amory had studied her for a long moment, long enough that Elara wondered whether 16 years of practiced sweetness had finally failed her before giving a single measured nod. I'll watch, Lady Voss. For your sake, I hope you're not merely a frightened bride imagining shadows where there are none. I hope so too, Elara thought, though what she said aloud was simply, thank you, my lord. The decoy goblet took longer to arrange than either Elara or Roderick expected. A royal goldsmith sworn to silence, with a debt of his own long ode to Roderic's late mother, crafted an exact twin of the gold-rimmed Vesmir glass Elara remembered from her first death, down to the small, deliberate flaw along its base that she'd noticed only in the final horrified seconds of her first life, when she'd stared at the cup that killed her and wondered uselessly why it mattered. Cashin, true to his word or perhaps simply desperate to prove it, quietly began distancing himself from Seraphine in small, deliberate ways. Fewer private audiences, shorter conversations, a coldness that Elara watched from across banquet halls with an unreadable expression. Whether it was guilt, love reasserting itself toward Elara, or simple fear of consequence, she couldn't say, and found she no longer particularly cared which it was, so long as it served the plan. Seraphine noticed the change in Cashin too. Elara saw it in the tightening of the courtier's jaw during council sessions, the new sharpness in her voice when she spoke to servants, the way her carefully maintained composure began ever so slightly to fray at the edges. Good asterisk, Elara thought. A frightened predator makes mistakes a confident one never would. 2 weeks before the accord, Torvin the alchemist vanished from the palace for 3 days, a family matter. His note to the king's household claimed and returned looking gaunt, his hands trembling worse than ever, his eyes darting toward every shadow in his own workshop. Roderic's locksmith reported that the hidden ledger had been moved to a second, better hidden location, wrapped now in oilcloth and sealed with wax. She's grown careful, Roderic told Elara during one of their increasingly rare orchard meetings. Perhaps too careful. If she suspects a trap, she may simply choose not to spring it at all. She won't abandon it, Elara said with a certainty that surprised even her. I've watched her for 16 years, Roderic, even if I never understood what I was seeing until now. Seraphine Kell doesn't fear being caught. She fears failing her family's memory, failing the vengeance she's spent her whole life building toward. A woman like that doesn't walk away from a plan 3 months in the making, she simply refines it. Then we refine our trap to match. 1 week before the autumn accord, Elara received a final, unsigned note slipped beneath her chamber door in the dead of night, written in a hand she didn't recognize. You are not the only one who remembers, Lady Voss. And I am not your ally. The night of the autumn accord arrived exactly as Elara remembered it, the same 1,000 candles, the same silk banners bearing the entwined crests of Dreven and Vesmir. The same swell of laughter rolling warm and golden across a hall that had once watched her die without truly seeing it happen. This time, she watched everything. Lord Amory stood near the wine service in the plain dark coat of a minor court official, unremarkable enough that no one's eyes lingered on him twice. Roderic remained near the king's dais, positioned to reach his father's ear the moment the truth demanded it. And Cashin, pale and tense beside her at the head table, kept his hand near hers throughout the endless toasts, as though sheer proximity might undo 3 lifetimes of failing to save her. Seraphine arrived fashionably late, radiant in deep Vesmir blue, and Elara watched her cross the hall with a predator's grace that no longer fooled her for even a heartbeat. Lady Voss. Seraphine's smile was flawless. You look lovely tonight, fitting for such a historic evening. As do you, Lady Kell. Elara returned the smile with equal precision. I understand you've selected the ceremonial wine yourself again this year. How thoughtful. Something flickered behind Seraphine's eyes, surprise quickly masked. She had not expected Elara to know that detail, had perhaps forgotten, across 3 unremembered lifetimes, how observant a woman could become once she stopped trusting her own safety to other people's kindness. The ceremony proceeded exactly as history demanded. The king rose. The treaty was read aloud to solemn applause. And then came the toast, the gold-rimmed goblets distributed among the honored guests of both kingdoms, Vesmir glass gleaming beneath 1,000 candle flames, exactly as Elara remembered it in the final seconds of her first life. Seraphine herself carried Elara's goblet to the head table, her smile warm, her hands steady with the practiced ease of a woman who had done this once before and watched it succeed. To new beginnings, Seraphine said, placing the goblet before Elara with a small, deferential bow that fooled every eye in the hall except the ones that had died watching her do it before. Elara lifted the goblet, the decoy, identical down to the small flaw along its base, filled not with poisoned wine but with the same ordinary vintage served to every other guest, and smiled. To new beginnings, she echoed and drank deeply, watching Seraphine's face for the moment recognition would dawn. It took 4 seconds. Elara counted them. Seraphine's composure cracked, not into panic, not yet, but into a confusion so genuine it was almost pitiable. The confusion of a woman watching a plan she'd perfected across multiple lifetimes fail to produce the one result she'd built her entire vengeance around. Her eyes darted just once toward the wine service, toward Master Torvin standing pale and rigid near the servants' entrance. That single glance was all Lord Amory needed. Master Torvin. The spymaster's voice cut through the hall's warm chatter like a blade through silk, quiet but carrying, the way only a man accustomed to being obeyed could manage. The King's Guard will escort you to the East Tower. You may bring your ledger, or we will retrieve it ourselves from beneath the loose floorboard of your second workshop near the dye works. The hall fell silent in stages, the way a held breath finally releases. Torvin's face went the color of old parchment. Seraphine's hand moved toward a small blade concealed in her sleeve. Elara realized with a cold jolt, toward a desperate final gambit, but Roderick was already there, his own hand closing over her wrist with the same quiet, deadly efficiency his half-brother had never quite managed to inherit. Lady Kell, Roderick said loud enough now for the entire hall to hear, you'll want to explain to my father exactly why the ceremonial goblet you personally selected for Lady Voss contains 3 times the lethal dose of Vesmir nightshade extract found in Master Torvin's private ledger, dated. Notably for this very evening, the accusation landed across the banquet hall like a thunderclap, 300 guests turning as one toward the woman who had, moments before, been the most celebrated courtier in the room. This is madness, Seraphine said, but her voice had lost its silk, gone thin and brittle with the particular panic of a plan collapsing in real time. A stolen ledger, the ravings of a disgraced bastard prince, my king, surely you don't believe. I believe, King Aldrich said slowly, rising from his throne with the terrible calm of a monarch who had just watched his own household nearly commit murder beneath his roof, that we will discover the truth of it very shortly, Lady Kell. Guards, seize her and seize the alchemist. No one leaves this hall until I understand exactly how close we came tonight to burying my son's bride. Seraphine's gaze found Elara across the chaos erupting around them, and in it for one unguarded moment. Elara saw not a monster, but a woman who had spent her entire life building toward this single act of vengeance, and had just watched it shatter against a bride who refused this time to die easily. You shouldn't have survived, Seraphine said quietly, only for Elara to hear as the guards closed in around her. No one survives the goblet twice. I didn't survive it twice, Elara replied, just as quietly, watching the guards pull Seraphine's wrists behind her back. I simply refused to drink from it a second time. The East Tower held Seraphine Kell for 11 days before her trial concluded, and in that time, the entire court learned what Elara had spent 3 months confirming in silence. That Master Torvin had mixed poison for gold and fear in equal measure, that Seraphine's vengeance against the crown had been years in the careful making. And that the servant boy who had once eavesdropped in the chapel garden had in the end sold his information to whichever side paid faster, which on the night that mattered most had been Lord Amory's purse rather than Seraphine's promises. King Aldrich did not have his son's favorite executed in the end. The Vesmir Treaty was too fragile, the political cost of a public beheading too steep against a peace already trembling under the weight of old grief. Instead, Seraphine Kell was exiled to a distant convent in the northern mountains, stripped of title and name, permitted to live out her vengeance-hardened life, in a silence far crueler. Elara suspected than any execution could have been for a woman who had built her entire identity around being seen, feared, and remembered. Master Torvin was less fortunate. Treason against the crown prince's own bride carried a sentence gold could not soften, and the alchemist who had once measured out doses in the neat, merciless math of murder was hanged within the week, his hidden fortune seized and returned. In a gesture Elara found darkly fitting to the royal treasury that funded the very Vesmir Treaty, his poison had nearly destroyed. Cashin came to her the evening after the trial concluded, standing in the doorway of her chambers with the particular exhaustion of a man who had spent 3 months watching his own failures made visible to an entire kingdom. I keep thinking, he said quietly, about all the ways I might have simply let you die and never known why, if you hadn't dreamed it, if you hadn't trusted Roderick, if 100 small chances hadn't fallen exactly the way they needed to. But they did, Elara said, and found to her own quiet surprise that she meant the words without bitterness. I did dream it, Cashin, I did survive. And I learned something in those 3 months that I don't think I could have learned any other way, that trust without vigilance isn't love. It's simply an invitation to be hurt by people who have learned exactly how much you're willing to forgive. Do you forgive me? He asked, for not seeing it sooner, for loving someone who nearly cost you your life. Elara considered the question honestly, the way she had learned to consider everything now, weighing it rather than simply offering the soft, easy answer that would once have come to her lips without thought. I don't know yet. But I know I'm no longer the woman who would have answered that question with an unconditional yes, simply because a prince asked it prettily. Perhaps that's its own kind of answer. Cashin nodded slowly, something like respect settling into the exhaustion on his face. Roderick tells me you plan to formalize an intelligence network of your own once we're married, court informants answering directly to the future queen. I very nearly died once for not knowing who to trust, Elara said. I don't intend to govern a kingdom the same way I once governed my own heart, blindly, and on faith alone. She married Cashin 6 months later in a ceremony far smaller and far more carefully guarded than the Autumn Accord had ever been. With Lord Amory himself standing watch over the ceremonial wine and Prince Roderick, pardoned publicly for his role in exposing the plot, elevated quietly to Warden of the Northern March in gratitude, standing as her own chosen witness rather than merely his brother's estranged sibling. In the years that followed, the court would tell many versions of the story of the Autumn Accord, the poisoned bride who lived, the courtier who nearly burned down a kingdom for vengeance, the bastard prince who finally found his purpose in truth-telling rather than silence. But Elara herself remembered it more simply than any of the versions the bards eventually set to music. She remembered dying once, quietly, with a smile on her face and a goblet in her hand, trusting a room full of people who had already decided she was disposable. And she remembered, more clearly than anything else, the exact moment she had decided never to make that mistake again. Not with wine, not with smiles, not with anyone's love, however sweetly it was offered. Some lessons she had learned could only be taught by dying once. But only the wise ever learn to live by them the second time.